Hello and welcome to Mornings. I'm Joe O'Brien. Liberal members in New South Wales are incensed by the party's decision to install Warren Mundine as the candidate for Gillmore. Locals had pre-selected real estate agent Grant Schultz, but the state executive intervened, dumped him and endorsed Mr Mundine. Political reporter Jane Norman joins us now from Parliament House. Jane, good morning. So what's the depth of the anger at the local level there in the Liberal Party?
Well, one Liberal source I spoke to just in the last few hours, Joe, has said this has caused such a backlash that it's the worst response they have seen yet to a headquarters intervention. Of course, we've seen examples before of Liberal Party, even Labor Party headquarters installing high-profile or star candidates in certain seats to give them a better chance. But in this case, some sources are worried that the reaction's been so bad it could very well backfire. Of course, Grant Schultz, he's a local real estate agent. He was pre-selected by local Liberal branches to contest the seat of Gillmore, but as you mentioned, state executive intervened, disendorsed him and has instead parachuted in Prime Minister Scott Morrison's pick of Warren Mundine. He is a high-profile candidate. Some polling in Gillmore, we understand, from the Liberal Party showed that Mr Mundine could have a decent chance of holding on to this ultra-marginal seat. Now, of course, at the moment it's held by Anne Sudmalis. She won it by just 1,500 votes at the last election, so it's going to be very tough. It's an ultra-marginal seat to hold on to. Now, as far as Scott Morrison's concerned, he has released a statement saying he's thrilled Warren Mundine is on board. He says he's demonstrated leadership over many decades and has a deep understanding of what Australian families are facing. But Grant Schultz, the disendorsed candidate, has now quit the party. He intends to run as an independent, and he's described Scott Morrison's intervention as harking back to the days of the Labor Party and Eddie Obeid. Here's what he had to say.
The betrayal of the party's core values of honesty, democracy and integrity. It's very disappointing to see that, I must say, and I'm disappointed not for myself but for the people of Gillmore and very much so the membership who have also, I believe, been not just let down but betrayed.
Grant Schultz there. And Jane, you mentioned that the party, it sounds like the party's got some internal polling showing that that Warren Mundine has a reasonable profile there. But just how important are the foot soldiers on election day? And if the Liberal Party doesn't have those foot soldiers because of this concern about what's happened, to what extent does that undermine their chances in the seat?
Well, they're hugely important. And in fact, that was why Anne Sudmalis, the existing or the current sitting member, quit the seat or announced her intention to quit the seat because she had lost control of her local branches. So she didn't feel that she had anywhere near enough the support or the resources to contest this seat. Well, it was those local branches who selected Grant Schultz. So he was their man. And now Warren Mundine, who doesn't live in the seat, he does have some connections to the area, is going to be the candidate. So it will be really interesting to see how it plays out locally. We've heard this morning from some branch members who are tearing up their Liberal Party membership. So it certainly has created a huge internal problem for the Liberal Party in the seat of Gillmore. But at the end of the day, there is always party loyalty. And if local members want to see the Liberal Party have any chance of holding on to this very, very marginal seat, then, they will likely sort of lock in behind him.
And of course, in Australia, we've got the coalition government, but in some cases, they do have three-cornered contests in seats in some situations. Is that likely to be the case here?
It's shaping up to possibly be a three-cornered contest, Joe. It's allowed in this situation because the sitting Liberal member, Anne Sudmalis, is vacating the seat. So it's sort of thrown open to both Liberals and Nationals. So Warren Mundine will be the Liberal Party candidate. We're hearing that former New South Wales MP Katrina Hodgkinson is weighing up whether she wants to run for the Nationals. Of course, the Labor Party locked in their candidate a while ago. So I've spoken to a couple of Liberals about this prospect. They're not too worried because apparently in federal seats, three-cornered contests can sometimes benefit the Liberal Party because they'll benefit from Nationals' preferences. But of course, adding a female candidate into the mix could shake things up. The Liberal Party and the National Party, the coalition generally, there's been a lot of focus on the kind of woman problem, the lack of female representation. So some Conservative voters might like the look of a female candidate and potentially a female MP in Gillmore.
And Jane, it'll be really interesting to hear what Scott Morrison has to say on this today. in light of the fury of some of the locals there in the seat of Gillmore. Are we expecting the Prime Minister is going to step up for a media conference today?
Well, we're expecting an announcement formally, so we should, in the next few hours, hear from Prime Minister Scott Morrison, possibly alongside Warren Mundine. They've known each other for a very long time. Scott Morrison, well, this was his pick, so of course he's going to defend it and stand beside Warren Mundine as his candidate. So hopefully in the next few hours we'll hear from the leader.
Okay, thanks a lot for that. Jane Norman reporting there from Parliament House in Canberra. The Parks and Wildlife Deputy Prime Minister Michael McCormack has been speaking this morning. Let's take a listen into what he's had to say.
Yes, we are. The Nationals are considering running a candidate in Gillmore, and we'll be having more to say about that in coming weeks. Fact is, when these seats are available because the incumbent is no longer standing, they are subject to the part of the coalition agreement which allows for three-corner contests. I ran in a three-corner contest against the Liberal in 2010. I'm a great coalitionist, Jim, as you are too, and we work very well together, but we also work well together when we are actually campaigning alongside one another, because whilst we've got a similar message, we've also got different messages. As far as you know, the fact is the Nationals stand for rural and regional Australia. I appreciate the Liberal Party does as well, but the Nationals' whole and sole focus is on rural and regional Australia, so a seat like Gillmore for the Nationals is a very viable option, because whilst I appreciate that the Liberal Party has made an announcement, or will be making an announcement as far as that seat's concerned, the Nationals also have some hold on the seat. John Sharp represented Gillmore in previous parliaments, and so there is a record of delivery and service by the National Party in the seat of Gillmore. And I know that when you have these rural and regional seats, while our message is, as I say, the same, it's also slightly different in as much as the Nationals always stand up for rural and regional issues wholly and solely, and appreciating that the Liberals have many city members and they're doing an outstanding job. We in government are doing an outstanding job for and on behalf of Australians, making sure that we get the right infrastructure, making sure that we get the right drugs on the PBS. You can't do that unless you've got a strong economy. I appreciate the fact that Minister Hunt, Greg Hunt, the Health Minister, announced a new cancer drug on Sunday, appreciating the fact that Orkambi for cystic fibrosis sufferers, that was put on the PBS. You don't get this sort of delivery and these sort of outcomes unless you've got a Liberal Nationals government in Canberra.
So will you be encouraging Katrina Hodgkinson to be that candidate for you in Gillmore?
Well, if Katrina Hodgkinson wants to put a hand up, and I've spoken to Katrina as she's the Vice Chair of the National Party, she's doing an outstanding job administratively. She's got an outstanding record as a Minister for Agriculture and other things in the State Parliament. Katrina, she represents everything that the National Party stands for. She represents rural and regional Australia. She's a fierce fighter for more infrastructure. She's a fierce fighter for farmers. She's somebody who understands what it takes to win a three-cornered contest. She understands what it takes to represent local people fiercely, and she also understands what it's like to be a cabinet minister, making sure that there's delivery for and on behalf of regional Australia, and as all Nationals do, always putting regional Australia first.
What do you make of the Prime Minister's handling of the situation in Gillmore? Does it hurt the government's chances for re-election? Will you be targeting the same road?
Well, that's a matter for the Liberal Party, and I appreciate what went on yesterday, understanding that is entirely a matter for the Liberal Party. But the fact is, whoever is going to represent Gillmore into the future, represent Gillmore in the federal parliament, continuing the outstanding job that Anne Sood-Marlis has done, Joe Gash has done before her, John Sharp did before, long before those two. We want either a Liberal or a National representing Gillmore. What we don't want is somebody from Labor, somebody who will be beholden to the unions, somebody who will be beholden to the agenda, whatever the Bill Shorten's got on his mind when he gets out of bed that morning, because he might change it by lunchtime. The fact is, we want a Liberal or a National representative for Gillmore going forward. And I'll do whatever it takes to get either a Liberal or a Nat up in that seat.
Back to the roads, the government has committed some of the funds to duplicating the Barton Highway. The community here wants to know that if you're backing Sophie Wade as the candidate for Eden Monaro, that you'll also be committing to completing the duplication of the Barton Highway all the way through. Can you give us an answer on that today?
Well, look, we are going to duplicate the Barton Highway, but it takes time and it takes money. I mean, there's on the national, federal, Infrastructure and Transport Minister, so I've got roads right across the nation. Princes Highway, Midland Highway in Tasmania. I've got, the Bruce Highway. Of course, the duplication, $10 billion has been put on the table for the Bruce Highway. There are arterial roads and there are national highways and state byways and little local roads that the federal government is looking at all over this nation, and it's a big nation, and we want to make sure that road safety is front and centre of everything that we talk about and everything that we do, but we also want to make sure that we get product to port. We want to make sure that we get those tourist networks funded, and that's why, yes, the Barton Highway is going to be duplicated eventually, but it takes time and it takes money. We're working towards it. Sophie Wade has done an outstanding job advocating for it, chaired the committee, the Barton Highway Action Group. I know Jim Molan has also been banging on my door, wearing out my carpet to make sure that we get funding for projects in and around Eden Monaro. Thank goodness someone is, and making sure, in the Parliament that is, making sure that I appreciate and I understand just how important it is. I drive this road very often. In fact, there wouldn't be too many weeks go by I'm not on this road, and I can understand and I can appreciate just how important the funding for this road is.
Gillmore has said that the Prime Minister has betrayed the party's core values. Do you agree with him?
Well, look, I understand that Grant Shilts would be, concerned. I understand that, he would be upset, but, politics is a tough and hurly-burly game. But again, I say, what happened yesterday is a matter for the Liberal Party, and going forward, I would like to see a Liberal or a National represent Gillmore in the Parliament. That is so important, not just for the Liberal and National parties. We're not just navel-gazing here, we're not just introspective, we're not just looking at our own ambition or whatever the case might be. We want to do the job for the people of Gillmore. We want to make sure that those people in that electorate get the very best service, get the very best delivery and get the very best outcomes for that rural and regional electorate. That electorate is so important in the national perspective, and we want to make sure those people get the best representation. The best representation for them after the next federal election is going to be either a Lib or a Nat, and I'll be working hard, whether it's a Lib or whether it's a Nat, to make sure that that candidate gets elected.
So if you said it to do whatever it takes, if your preferred National didn't become the pre-selected National in that seat, would you intervene?
Well, that's very hypothetical, and democracy takes some twists and turns at times, and we want to make sure that we get the very best candidates with the very best opportunity to win.
So
and
would you rule it out then?
well, I mean, it's a very hypothetical question. If if this happened or that happened, what might I do? The fact is, I've got outstanding candidates. One of them is standing right beside me, Sophie Wade. I want to see her as the Nationals member for Eden Monaro. I think that for Eden Monaro, that's going to be the best possible outcome. And I'll be working hard to making sure that Sophie gets elected. I want to make sure that right across the nation, Liberals and Nationals have the very best opportunity to win their seats. Not for ourselves, but for the future of Australia. If Bill Shorten becomes the Prime Minister of Australia, it's going to be a very different Australia after May or whenever the election is held. And it doesn't matter whether you're in Murrum-Bateman or one of the very nice little towns in and around Eden Monaro, or whether you're on the mid-north coast of New South Wales, as I heard last week. There's a lot of pensioners, there's a lot of retirees very worried, very perturbed about their retiree savings. They've already paid tax on their franking credit, they've already paid tax on their savings. They don't want them double taxed. They don't want them stolen by Bill Shorten and his cronies, who also want to take away negative gearing. And for coastal towns, that's going to not just decimate but destroy those coastal towns and the real estate prices in them. And it's not going to also help people who are renting. I mean, it has a perverse outcome because it's only going to push rents up. So for retirees, for people who have taken that option and saved a little bit, and there's a lot of nurses, a lot of police officers, a lot of fireys, a lot of people who are not rich by any stretch of the imagination, who rely on negative gearing, and many of them are also looking towards retirement. They want to make sure that they get their franking credits. Bill Shorten stands to take that money away from them. Well, the business case is a part of what the state governments expect and want and ensure that we do. And we need to make sure that we prioritise the areas that need the first possible work. So the duplication of the Barton Highway is happening. It's a rolling process. It's like the Bruce Highway in Queensland, working towards it stretch by stretch, from town to town, making sure that we do deliver duplication, but it takes time, it takes money. I might get Sophie, who has been on that action.
Okay, we might leave that there for the moment. That was from Murray Bateman, just north of Canberra. Anthony, what do you make of this move by Scott Morrison to parachute in Warren Mundine to this seat?
I think it's a very odd move. Gillmore's a regional seat. For people in other states who don't know it, it's south of Wollongong on the south coast of New South Wales. It's an electorate that's moved around a bit over the years. When it moves towards Wollongong, it picks up Labor booths, but it's on a relatively strong set of Liberal boundaries at the moment, but the margin is only 0.7%. So it's really run down in recent years. The Nationals used to hold it when the seat was first contested in the 80s. But in those days, it used to extend west of the mountains to include Goulburn and rural areas. Since all that was removed, the Nationals have been struggling to get 5% of the vote in that electorate, because it's basically a seat of some rural districts around Nowra in the Shoalhaven Valley, lots and lots of retirement areas, Bateman's Bay, St George's Basin, Kiama, which is right on the edge of the Illawarra and is a bit of a retirement area as well as sort of an escape from the city place. So it's that sort of an electorate. It's not a rural electorate. So that's the sort of seat it is. And the Liberals won it for all but one term since 1993, since it adopted roughly its current boundaries. Joanna Gash, the former member, was extremely popular, but Anne Sudmalis, who's replaced her, has not been as popular, and the margin has declined over the last two elections. It was always going to be a really hot shot for Labor to try and win this. They're running Fiona Phillips, a candidate who's running seats in the district before. The Liberal Party state government has spent a lot of money upgrading roads to the district. So the roads, for anybody, people in Sydney will know, the road south of Kiama was very windy and all over the place. They're all busy being upgraded and large segments have been opened. So there's lots of good things for the state government to be selling in the districts, and they've only got, because they're only 2 months out from an election. But for the federal election, Warren Mundine doesn't have, I'm not aware of a great connection with the electorate. Katrina Hodgkinson, who's been talked about as the National Party candidate, doesn't have a great connection with the electorate. This is the sort of seat where you need a good local politician, someone who's really known in the local area. If you're going to bring in an outsider, you need to have somebody who's got a real profile. And I'm not convinced Warren Mundine has that sort of big profile that would allow them to get extra votes and win an electorate like that.
So what do you reckon is behind the thinking with this?
Well, I'm a little unsure, to be honest. It doesn't sound like a brilliant plan to me. I've got a smart idea. This doesn't sound like one. Look, I mean, he may be, perhaps he's going to be good as a campaigner. I don't know, but it doesn't strike me as being something that will help them win, especially when all they've done is really annoy all the local branches. Grant Schultz, son of a former Liberal MP at state and federal level, he's had been challenging Sudmalis for the pre-selection and had the numbers when she withdrew. Now, perhaps they didn't think he was strong enough. I'm really not sure. But to be honest, they'll lose a lot of foot soldiers if they really have annoyed the local branches.
Do you know much at all about Grant Schultz, whether he had a reasonable profile, whether he was going to be a reasonable candidate?
I can't say. I mean, these are regional seats. You really need to know the local area, and it's sort of, I'm Sydney-based, so I'm not completely in touch down there. But he was, I'm not sure. I mean, the only thing I've heard from Liberals is they didn't think he was they thought they could have got a better candidate, but, you always think you can get a better candidate often. But he will be a thorn in the saddle as running as an independent. Now, most independents get less than 10% of the vote, so they're not really competitive. But if he's running, the Nationals are running and the Liberals are running, if there's a general swing against the government, which all the polls are saying, and in a seat with a margin of 0.7%, you've put a lot of hurdles in the way you're trying to win the seat.
And what about that added challenge with this now of having local former Liberal members, some are tearing up their membership, not turning up to campaign on election day and campaigning for Grant Schultz?
When you've got a marginal seat, you need people handing out how to vote cards. You need to get out there. You need to get your message out there. And particularly if you're running a three-cornered contest, the Liberals and Nationals are both running. You need the message out there. You need the how to vote card to put the other coalition party second, because while it's some have argued that if you run a three-cornered contest with a Liberal and a National, you can increase the total coalition vote. if you don't increase it by more than the votes you lose as preferences flowing between the two candidates, you get no net gain. So there's a lot of debate about whether you get any advantage out of running three-cornered contests. They're very rare to run nowadays. I mean, they were much more common before 1990, but both parties have avoided them ever since about 1987 because while you can gain votes, perhaps, you lose votes as preferences as well.
So in light of what's happened, what chance do you give the coalition of winning this seat now? Do you think it has a better chance today than it did yesterday, or that has been undermined?
I do not think the coalition have a better chance today than they did yesterday. And they've made the whole issue of the candidates a big issue in the local electorate. Perhaps it will give Warren Mundine the profile in the electorate he was after. But to be honest, I think that they've just created a controversy in the local electorate. We'll have to look at, I think people should be looking at what the local papers are saying for the next week and what they think of this choice.
And what has history shown about candidates that have been parachuted into seats by a state executive overruling the local branch?
Oh, you've got a long history of them. You'd have to look on either side. But I mean, the one thing I would say is this is a regional seat. You're much more likely to want a candidate who's known locally. Now, it's certainly the case that this fuss will create a profile for Warren Mundine as a candidate, but whether it's a profile which adds to his vote or not, I'm not sure. When you have a high-profile candidate like Warren Mundine, you've got two options. You can run someone like Maxine McEwen-Bennelong, who's someone who had a high media profile and visibility and probably added to the Labor Party vote in that electorate. Or you have someone like Peter Garrett, who came in for the Labor Party in a safe seat and added to the general lustre of an overall election campaign. I'm not sure that Warren Mundine does either of those. I'm not sure he's the ideal candidate for a marginal regional seat, and I'm not sure that his candidacy adds a lustre to the overall coalition campaign.
Are the Liberals facing any other significant pre-selection issues before election day?
Oh, look, we've seen Kelly O'Dwyer pull out in Higgins, which means there's a pre-selection battle to go on there. I'm still not quite sure whether the New South Wales Liberal Party has sorted out Reid, where Craig Kelly was facing a challenge. It's rather hard to keep track of how these things go on. There's talk of Craig Laundy in Reid, David Coleman in Banks, two other marginal seats, whether they'll recontest. At the moment, they've got pre-selection. But there are rumours around whether candidates will whether some members are going to pull out rather late. Who knows? But certainly, if you run down the list, there's lots of seats where that doesn't seem to have a completed pre-selection list. I think they've got most of their own seats done. But as I keep pointing out, the government won 76 of the 150 seats at the last election. There's 151 seats in the new parliament. There's been redistributions in several states, which means the government's numbers have gone from 76 to either 74 or 73 once you include the Wentworth by-election. So they need to gain 3 to 4 seats to get back into government, and the polls are showing them losing seats. So that's the difficulty the government faces.
There still seems to be talk around the possibility of an earlier election than May. What are the chances of that, considering just how far the coalition is behind in the polls now?
Well, we haven't seen a poll yet this year. Normally the governments get a little bit of a boost over the Christmas holidays because everyone stops paying attention. And I think that they can announce an election this weekend, which would be held on the 2nd of March, which would be 3 weeks before the New South Wales election. And that would avoid the New South Wales election having to be moved or anything. If they don't go now, they have to wait till the 11th or 18th of May, which is after the federal budget.
And so what do you reckon the chances are of them calling an early election then?
I don't think they look likely. The government seems to have plenty of other things on its plate this week. It's busy campaigning, but certainly I think if they go into the election starting this weekend, they've got a whole bunch of negatives, a whole bunch of technical things they haven't nailed down. For instance, Gillmore, for instance, Higgins, pre-selections and seats like that. If you're going into an election campaign and only just doing that, then you're taking a bit of a risk, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and so if that's the case, they're looking more likely there'll be an election in May, so we will have a New South Wales election before then. What likely effect is the New South Wales election going to have on a federal election, and how are things looking for Gladys Berejiklian in New South Wales?
The problem for Gladys Berejiklian and the New South Wales government is a lot of the key seats they're trying to defend have got cover the same areas as the federal seats. And the Labor Party's busy campaigning in a whole bunch of seats where there's also a state campaign on as well. The state government has a series of problems in rural New South Wales with the rise of the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers Party. You've got Pauline Hanson's One Nation is going to be nominating candidates, so we haven't seen any of them yet. They will be splintering the vote in rural seats, which causes problems for the National Party. There's no general theme to where all the marginal seats are in terms of Liberal seats in Sydney. Some are inner city, some are outer city. There's the delays in a couple of capital works projects which are being very effectively used by Labor against the government. So the government's got a whole series of problems. The most likely outcome from my observation is that the government will lose its majority. It'll move into minority after the 23rd of March. And that creates a problem for the federal government because 23rd of March, it's 10 days till the votes are finalised. So there'll be a period of 10 days where they'll be haggling over who's going to form government and how in New South Wales. And as soon as that's over, there's a federal budget and a federal election. So there's going to be a lot of distractions for the Liberal Party in New South Wales in the run-up to the federal election. And it must be said, it's Victoria and Queensland and Western Australia which are more of the problem for the Liberal Party at the moment and the National Party. And I think that the state election just might make New South Wales a bit of a problem for them as well.
Yeah, well, a busy couple of months for you ahead.
Very busy.
So you've
very
got
busy.
your touch panel ready. Good stuff. Okay, Anthony Green, thanks for all that analysis.